The representatives of Azerbaijan, Algeria, Argentina, Bangladesh, Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, Vietnam, Egypt, Israel, Indonesia, Iraq, Islamic Republic of Iran, Kazakhstan, Qatar, Cuba, Kuwait, Mauritania, Malaysia, the Maldives, Morocco, Namibia, Norway, Pakistan, Peru, the Republic of Korea, Saudi Arabia, Sierra Leone, Syrian Arab Republic, Tunisia, Turkey, Philippines, Chile, Sri Lanka, and South Africa to participate in this meeting. As I can see, it is so decided. In accordance with the provisional rules of procedure and the previous practice in this regard, I propose that the Council invite the Minister of Foreign Affairs and expatriates of the observer states of Palestine to participate in this meeting. I can see no objections. It is so decided. On behalf of the Council, I welcome His Excellency Mr. Riyad al-Maliki. I give the floor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the State and the expatriates of Palestine. I give him the floor. In accordance with the Rule of 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I also invite Mr. Tor Venesland to participate in this meeting, the Special Coordinator of the Middle East process. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I also invite the following to participate in this meeting: His Excellency Mr. Hamid Abelloyero, Permanent Observer at the Observer Mission of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to the United Nations; His Excellency Mr. Olaf Skog, Head of the Delegation of the European Union to the United Nations; His Excellency Mr. Chik Nyang, Chair of the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People; and His Excellency Mr. Maged Abdelaziz, Permanent Observer of the League of Arab States to the United Nations. It is so decided. And now the Security Council will begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I now give the floor to Mr. Tor Vennesland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Excellency, Foreign Minister Lavrov, Foreign Minister Malki, Minister of State Shaheen Al-Marar, Excellencies, members of the Council. Days ago, Muslims around the world celebrated Eid al-Fitr, bringing to a close the holy month of Ramadan, which overlapped with the Christian Easter and Jewish Passover. This holy period, while mostly calm, regrettable also witnessed shocking incidences of violence at holy sites and tensions across the occupied Palestinian territory and in Israel, with a brief escalation spilling over into the region. While a wider-scale escalation was averted, with each de-escalation, the stakes get higher and the tools at our disposal become fewer. The current trajectory is neither sustainable nor inevitable. The parties to the region and the international community need to address the underlying political, security, economic, and institutional challenges driving the conflict. There must be an end to the unilateral measures, to the provocations, to the incitements that enable violence and prevent progress towards resolving this conflict and ending the occupation. Mr. President, overall, in the occupied West Bank, 17 Palestinians, including 2 children, were killed and 200 Palestinians, including 4 women and 38 children, were injured by Israeli security forces during demonstration, clashes, search and arrest operations, attacks, and alleged attacks against Israelis and other incidents. Another 39 Palestinians, including 3 women and 4 children, were injured by Israeli settlers or other civilians in shooting attacks, stone throwing, and other incidents. 4 Israeli civilians, including 2 women and 1 child, were killed and 31 injured, including 2 women, 1 child, and 12 Israeli security force personnel by Palestinians in shooting and ramming attacks, clashes, the throwing of stones and Molotov cocktails, and other incidents. In addition, a foreign national was killed and 7 foreigners were injured. The holiday period was largely observed peacefully, with millions of Muslims visited to Al-Aqsa compound during Ramadan, highest numbers in many years. However, on 4 and 5 April, confrontation erupted at the holy sites in Jerusalem when Israeli security forces entered the Al-Qibli prayer hall at Al-Aqsa Mosque and forcibly removed Palestinians who were barricaded inside. ISF deployed stun grenades, beat Palestinians with batons and rifles, and fired rubber-coated metal bullets, while some Palestinians inside the mosque lit them through fireworks and stones on the ISF. These developments came in the wake of provocative calls and incitements from several parties. Israeli extremists called for Jews to conduct ritual animal sacrifices at the holy sites. Hamas and other armed Palestinian factions called for Palestinians to go to Al-Aqsa to resist such act. As in previous year, Israeli police blocked attempts to carry out animal sacrifices on the compound, arresting at least 2 Israelis. Following these events at the holy sites on 4 and 5 April, militants in Gaza and Lebanon fired dozens of rockets towards Israel. While some were intercepted by Israeli aerial defense systems, 46 landed in Israel, causing only injury and damage to property. The barrage from Lebanon was the most intense since 2006. Israeli defense forces carried out airstrikes in Gaza and southern Lebanon on 7 April, aimed at what were said to be Hamas targets. A children's hospital and health clinic in Gaza were damaged, however. No injuries were reported. Lebanon's prime minister condemned the launching of rockets towards Israel. UN de-escalation effort, as well as coordination and liaison with the parties with UNIFIL, helped restore calm. From 12 April, Israeli authorities prohibited non-Muslim visits to the site for the last days of Ramadan, in line with usual practice. On 15 April, confrontation erupted between Israeli police and Orthodox Christian worshippers attempting to enter the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem's Old City for the Holy Fire ceremony, exceeding an attendance limit enforced by the Israeli authorities, citing safety concerns. the Greek Patriarchate and other church leaders cited the limits on visitors, suggesting it was unjustifiable, low, and violated the status quo. Mr. President, on other violence in the occupied West Bank and in Israel continued during the reporting period. Many Palestinian casualties were injured in Israeli military operations in Area A of the occupied West Bank and subsequent clashes, some of them armed. On 16 March, undercover Israeli forces entered Jenin, resulting in clashes. Israeli forces shot and killed 4 Palestinians, including a 14-year-old bystander. Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad claimed 2 of the individuals killed as members of their armed wings. In Jerusalem, Old City, on the 1st of April, an Arab-Israeli man was shot dead by ISF near the entrance of the holy sites in disputed circumstances. On 7 April, 2 British Israeli sisters, the youngest 15-year-old, were killed in a shooting attack in the West Bank by perpetrators in a car with Palestinian plates. The mother was critically injured on the attack and died 3 days later. No arrests have been made. The same day, an Italian national was killed and 7 other Italian and British nationals were wounded in Tel Aviv in what the Israeli police said was a ramming attack carried out by an Arab-Israeli man who was shot dead at the scene by the police. The alleged perpetrator's family disputed the ramming allegations. On 10 April, a 15-year-old Palestinian boy was shot and killed by ISF during an arrest operation and ensuing clashes in Akbat Jabir refugee camp near Jericho. Eyewitnesses said that the boy was a bystander, while the Israeli army said that the soldiers returned fire after being shot at. Levels of settler-related violence also remained high. Huwara remained a flashpoint. On 25 March, Palestinians carried out a shooting attack in the town, injuring 2 Israeli soldiers. Israeli settlers entered the town the same day, and again on 27 March, throwing stones and injured Palestinians and damaged property. On 6 April, an Israeli settler shot and injured a Palestinian boy in Jerusalem's Old City. On 18 April, 2 Israelis were shot and wounded while in their vehicle in East Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. The following day, ISF said that they had arrested a 15-year-old Palestinian boy in Nablus who had confessed to carrying out the attack. Mr. President, I'm deeply concerned by the violence and inflammatory actions over the past weeks, particularly the violent confrontations inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I again urge for the status quo of the holy sites in Jerusalem to be held in line with the special role of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. I condemn the indiscriminate launching of rockets towards the Israeli population centers. I reiterate that acts of terror and targeting of civilians are abhorrent and must be condemned and rejected by all. All perpetrators of violence must be held accountable and swiftly brought to justice. Security forces must exercise maximum restraint and use of lethal force only when strictly unavoidable to protect life. I am appalled that children continue to be victims of violence. Children must never be the targets of violence, used or put in harm's way. Mr. President, on 19 March, senior Egyptian, Jordanian, Israeli, Palestinian, and US officials met in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, to further discuss understanding reached in Aqaba, Jordan, on 23 February. In the spirit of the agreement reached in Aqaba and Sharm el-Sheikh, I urge all parties to exercise the utmost restraint and refrain from all steps that could exacerbate the situation and take concrete steps to implement the joint communiqué. I remain closely engaged with all relevant parties to de-escalate tension and chart political way forward. Mr. President, turning to settlement-related developments, on 22nd March, Israeli authorities announced tenders to 940 housing units in settlements in Area C and 89 in East Jerusalem. On 10 April, Israeli government ministers and members of Knesset joined over 15,000 settlers and other Israeli civilians in a heavily secured march to the illegal outpost of Eviatar in the northern West Bank, calling on the government to legalize it under Israeli law. I reiterate that all settlements are illegal under international law and that they are a substantial obstacle to peace. I call on all parties to avoid unilateral measures and provocations such as this march that can further inflame tension. Demolitions and seizures of Palestinian-owned property remains a deep concern. During the reporting period, the Israeli authorities demolished, seized, and forced owners to demolish 11 Palestinian-owned structures in Area C and 8 in East Jerusalem, displacing 14 Palestinians, including children and relatives, and including 7 children. The relative decline in this period reflects on Ramadan. As in previous years, the demolitions were carried out due to the lack of Israeli-issued building permits that are nearly impossible for Palestinians to obtain. On 3 April, Israeli Supreme Court ruled against the eviction of a Palestinian family from their home in East Jerusalem neighborhood of Silvan, ending a 30-year legal battle. I call on Israeli authorities to end the displacement and eviction of Palestinians and to approve additional plans that could enable Palestinians to build legally and address their development needs. Turning to the region, Mr. President. On the Golan, Israeli Defense Forces reported from 8 to 9 April 6 rockets launched from Syria towards Israel and their retaliation with artillery fire and airstrikes targeting locations in Syria, including Syrian army positions. UNDOF was in contact with the Israeli Defense Forces and Syrian authorities to de-escalate the situation, urging them to exercise maximum restraint and to respect the ceasefire in accordance with the 1974 disengagement of force agreement. No casualties were reported. Mr. President, amidst the deteriorating situation on the ground, the Palestinian authorities continue to face significant fiscal and institutional challenges. At the same time, the UN agencies, funds and programs that provide support to Palestinian people in coordination with and complementary with the PA are facing all significant funding shortfalls, notably the World Food Programme and UNRWA, impacting basic service delivery. I'm particularly concerned by the prolonged closure of schools and UNRWA health clinics in the West Bank, where PA and UNRWA teachers, as well as UNRWA health staff, has been on strike for weeks, impacting children across the OPT. Efforts are needed by all parties and the international community to strengthen Palestinian institutions, improve governance, and shore up the fiscal health of the Palestinian Authority. These steps must be part of a broader political effort that addresses the underlying drivers of the conflict, provides the space for access and space and access needed for Palestinians' economy to grow, and encourage the parties to update their economic and administrative relations. The forthcoming ad hoc liaison committee meeting in Brussels early May provides an opportunity for a strategic shift in this direction. Addressing these immediate challenges can also provide much needed momentum towards a restabilization, a political horizon towards the two-state solution. I urge Israelis, Palestinians, regional states, and the broader international community to show leadership, re-engage and work collectively in the pursuit of peace with the aim of ending the occupation and resolving the conflict in line with international law, relevant UN resolutions and previous agreements, in pursuit of the vision of a two states, Israel and an independent, democratic, contiguous, viable and sovereign Palestine, living side by side in peace and security within secure and recognized borders on the basis of the P-67 lines, with Jerusalem as capital of both states. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Venezuela for his briefing. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Riyad al-Maliki, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of the Observer State of Palestine.
Mr. President, allow me at the outset to congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Security Council and to express our appreciation for your decision to share this open debate. Allow me also to acknowledge and thank all the countries that will speak today in defense of the UN Charter, international law, and the rights of the Palestinian people. I thank Special Coordinator Winsland for his briefing. Mr. President, Mahmoud Darwish, our national and universal poet, said, and I quote, "I know that you, the masters of words, have no need for rhetoric before the eloquence of blood. Therefore, our words will be as simple as our rights." End of quotation. So I came here with clear messages. 75 years ago, our people endured the Nakba, a five-letter word that means catastrophe and encompasses the disposition and displacement of an entire nation. Almost overnight, 2/3 of our people became refugees. 75 years later, the Nakba continues. The denial of our rights and the displacement and replacement of our people is still underway with one objective, pursued in broad daylight, annexation. It is time to bring the Nakba to an end. This is the most protracted refugee crisis in the world, the most protracted denial of national, collective, and individual rights in the world, the most protracted protection crisis in the world, the longest occupation of an entire territory in modern history. So the question begs itself, why is it still ongoing? Is it because there is a lack of rules or a lack of resolve? The rules are clear. The entire international law-based order is premised in two fundamental principles from which no derogation is tolerated: the right of peoples to self-determination and the inadmissibility of the acquisition of land by force. There are no greater breach to these rules than aggression and annexation. The international community does not only have the possibility to ensure international law is respected, it has the responsibility to do so, regardless of the identity of the perpetrators and regardless of the identity of the victims. Had the UN Charter been upheld, had the Security Council's resolutions been implemented, peace would have prevailed in Palestine a long time ago, rather than occupation and apartheid. That is all we ask for: upholding the UN Charter and implementing UN resolutions. Mr. President, we must express gratitude for the clear and unequivocal stance of the international community condemning violations of international law and in support of just and lasting peace in accordance with the internationally recognized terms of reference. This might be the most established, solid, consistent international consensus on any conflict in the world. So what explains that this consensus did not change the reality on the ground? The reality on the ground is the result of failure, not fatality. Because while the international community has adopted clear positions, it did not back them with decisive action. Why is it that when it comes to Israel, the international community can take a stance but cannot act upon it? The rules are clear. Now we need the resolve to enforce them. Yesterday, many delegations in this chamber spoke of this self-evident truth. International law must be upheld. They spoke of obligations, of accountability, of collective responsibility. There is nothing that undermines more the authority and credibility of international law than double standards, selectivity, schizophrenia. How is Israel being held accountable for breaching the law, the Charter, countless UN resolutions over decades and decades? How many Israeli officials have been held accountable in any form or shape for pursuing colonial settlements in our land, for forcibly displacing our people, for the targeting and indiscriminate attacks against our civilians, for demolishing the homes and structures many of you have funded. What consequences did they face? You want to know why this council's condemnations and calls are not heeded? For one simple reason: impunity. You want to know how the supremacists arrived to power on a supremacist and colonial platform that is now of official government policy? Impunity. Is there anywhere else in the world where you would condemn all the illegal actions of the occupying power and then tell the people under its occupation that their existence and their rights are eventually entirely subject to the goodwill of their oppressors? Mr. President, we do not take for granted the support provided by the international community to our people over the years, including Palestine refugees through UNRWA. We do not take for granted the support provided to our national institutions. We do not take for granted the support provided to peace efforts when they were underway. We do not take for granted the daily efforts to rein in Israel's colonial appetite. This investment for the freedom of one people and peace for all peoples deserve protecting. There are two threats looming: for the international community to be demobilized until such time as the parties are ready to make peace. There is no much we can do. The second threat is for the international community to be demoralized. There is no way to mount enough pressure on Israel to change course. We are convinced there is no alternative to the two-state solution, and we remain committed to it, but unfortunately the circumstances are such that we can no longer salvage it. Such self-fulfilling prophecies would ensure that the reality on the ground will continue being shaped by the will of the colonial settlers rather than the will of the peacemakers. We said a while ago that settlers will not only take over Palestinian land, they will take over Israeli politics. They will turn a solvable political conflict into perpetual religious conflict. Here we are. Regardless of how difficult it seems for any of you today to step in, to take bold actions, trust us when we say the price of inaction is infinitely higher for the Palestinian people, but not only. Mr. President, we have decided not to spare any effort for peace. We welcomed any initiatives consistent with international legitimacy, and we're always ready and willing to meet and to explore any avenue to put an end to illegal unilateral measures and to restore a political horizon in line with the internationally recognized terms of reference. We remain committed to uphold our own obligations and to pursue a peaceful path forward. We do so because we are conscious of the alternative. We appreciate all efforts to spare the life of Palestinians and to improve their lives, but they are no substitute to a political solution. We cannot coexist with occupation. There cannot be an international law-based order for the rest of the world and a negotiations-based order or any occupying power-imposed order for Palestine. Negotiations aim at agreeing on how to uphold the law and not on ensuring its permanent breach. Israel is outraged that it could be held to the same standards as all of us. It will tell you without blinking, and I quote, "Yes, our settlers have the right to live in the occupied Palestinian territory. And yes, we have every intention to make our annexation of Jerusalem permanent, and yes, that is the same fate we reserve to the Jordan Valley and to most of the West Bank. Yes, we will keep for decades 2 million Palestinians under blockade in the Gaza Strip. Yes, we are not in favor of the two-state solution, and yes, we are entitled to kill Palestinians. And yes, nobody gets to tell us what to do. And yes, we get to tell everybody what they should do. Israel will scold this council and every UN member for stating the law. If that is how it deals with you, can you imagine how it deals with the people under its occupation? Israel will explain to us that the problem is not them violating international law and the fundamental rights of our people, but us raising this matter in international fora. They will tell us that the obstacle to peace are not the crimes committed against our people, but our attempts to ensure those responsible are held accountable. They can be partners for peace while denying our existence, denying our rights, annexing our land, killing our people, rejecting the two-state solution. But how can we be genuine peace partners if we protest these actions? Palestinians are not killed by the hundreds and thousands every year by mistake. The disregard for Palestinian life is such, the will to subjugate and dominate them is such, the feeling of entitlement is such that Israel has put in place a shoot-to-kill policy that affects indiscriminately our children, our youth, and our elderly anywhere and everywhere in Palestine. Soldiers and settlers wreak havoc in our streets and in our lives. No one is safe, everywhere, anytime. Not in our land, not in our streets, not in our mosques, not in our churches, not in our schools, and not in our homes. There is no feeling of shame in proclaiming that one group, the one illegally present in our land, must benefit from all the privileges, while the other group, the lawful inhabitants of the land, shall continue to be deprived of their most fundamental rights. Mr. President, there is a simple principle that underlines all of international law and international justice. Deterrence is the only way to prevent recurrence. The only discussion worth having is how can you mount a collective response that would deter anyone from breaching international law and would ensure everyone commits to peace in words and in deeds. As long as Israel reaps the benefits of its occupation, while we pay the cost, annexation and apartheid are the only reality we are left with. Make the occupation costly, and I can assure you it will come to an end. The Israeli people themselves will make sure it comes to an end. But let me be more specific so no one can say it cannot be done. Where can you start? Recognize the state of Palestine if you have not done so yet. How can any country that supports the two-state solution and peace justify not recognizing till now the state of Palestine, without which there is no two-state solution? Do you wait for Israel to recognize the PLO before you recognized it? Or did your recognition of the PLO led Israel to eventually follow suit? Why did you not wait for our approval to recognize Israel and need Israeli permission to recognize the state of Palestine? If you don't recognize the state of Palestine now, when it is under vital threat, when will you do it? When the two-state solution is definitely dead and buried? Why would this council, who has been calling for a two-state solution for decades, not recommend membership of the state of Palestine to the General Assembly? I have no doubt that the General Assembly will agree once that recommendation is made here in the Council. Is there a better way to embody international support to the two-state solution than to have the state that has been unjustly deprived of membership since 1948 finally become a UN member? Why would Israel, which violated the very conditions of its membership, namely resolutions 181 and 194, and continues violating the Charter, be entitled to membership, and we, who honor the UN Charter, be deprived of it? This Council has affirmed repeatedly the need for protection of civilians, all civilians. While we adhere to this principle, it is our people who needs international protection. If there is anyone who has a right to security in the occupied Palestinian territory, it is the Palestinian people. You are all opposed to settlements. Settlements deprive us of our land and resources and annihilate any chance for peace. Ban settlement products. Ban trade with settlements. Sanction those who collect funds for settlements and those who advocate for them and those who advance them. List as terrorist organizations the group of settlers that are killing, maiming, burning in front of the whole world because they are certain they will not be held accountable. Link in deeds, not words, your relations with Israel to Israel's commitment to international law and peace. Take measures to roll back annexation and to end occupation. Mount a collective front to push for peace, to take initiatives and to hold the parties accountable if they do not implement the international will embodied in the UN Charter and in the UN resolutions. Support every effort to uphold international law rather than obstruct it, starting with the ICJ. In short, incentivize freedom, justice, and peace, and disincentivize oppression, perpetual occupation, and annexation. Peace that has eluded us for so long will then finally be within our grasp. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Mr. al-Maliki for his statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Each time I set foot in this chamber for these debates, I mentally prepare myself for the bias, falsehoods, and singling out of Israel, the only liberal democracy in the region, the only. Yet, today's debate has crossed all lines. Not only am I both appalled and outraged to the very depth of my soul, but I am sad, very, very sad. Today is one of the most sacred days of the year for the State of Israel. Today is Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day for our fallen troops and victims of terror, the day during which every Israeli remembers those who paid the ultimate price while defending the Jewish homeland. In Israel, this is a day of unmatched national mourning. Two sirens, one in the evening and one in the morning, ring across the country, bringing all activity, even traffic, to a grinding halt, so that every Israeli can observe 2 minutes of solemn silence. All restaurants, cafes, and shops shut down, while military cemeteries are filled with hundreds of thousands of visitors paying their respects. Television programming is dedicated solely to films and reels mourning those who fell, while an entire channel runs the names of every single fallen hero. This day holds more sanctity to Israelis than almost any other day of the year. Mr. President, We made numerous requests to reschedule today's debate, describing the deep importance of the day. Yet, tragically, this council refused to budge. The decision to nonetheless hold this debate on today, of all days, only further proves what Israelis already know and feel about this biased organization. Mr. President, what would you do if this council was convening to single out and condemn the Russian Federation and your soldiers on the 9th of May, on Victory Day over the Nazis? Today, on this hallowed day, every Israeli remembers those courageous sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, and dear friends who lost their lives defending Israel. Yet, while Israelis mourn, this council, as usual, will hear more blatant lies condemning the state of Israel and falsely painting it as the root of all the region's problems. This couldn't be further from the truth. The only reason this conflict has not yet been resolved is because the Palestinians refuse to accept the very existence of Israel, the Jewish state, the Jewish state. They have proven this by rejecting every peace initiative and by inciting to terrorism, brainwashing their children to hate and murder Jews. Shame, shame, shame. And meanwhile, the true threat to the region and the world, the Ayatollah regime in Iran, will, as usual, Mr. President, not even be a footnote in today's discussion. Iran, the #1 state sponsor of terror, has never been closer to becoming a nuclear power. But in this council, Iran's destructive and dangerous advancements will likely not even be mentioned, let alone condemned. So today, on this sacred and solemn day during which we Israelis bow our heads to the 28,468 fallen soldiers and victims of terror, I refuse to take part in this absurd farce. Instead, I will take this opportunity to commemorate this past year's victims of Palestinian terror and those who fell in the line of duty. Yonatan Chavakuk, Boaz Gol, Oren Ben Iftach, Noam Raz, Bar Falach, Noah Lazar, Ido Baruch, Ronen Chanina, Shalom Sofer, Moti Ashkenazi, Tamir Avichai, Mikhail Ledigin, Aryeh Shopok, Eli Mizrahi, Natalie Mizrahi, Rafael Ben Eliyahu, Asher Natan, Shaul Chai, Ilya Sosansky, Irina Korolova, Shimon Ma'atuf, Alter Shlomo Lederman, Yaakov Palei, Asher Palei, Asil Sowaed, Yagel Yaniv, Hillel Yaniv, Ilan Ganeles, Or Eshkar, Alessandro Parini, Maya D, Rina D, Lucy D. If this council refuses to respect their memory, I will dedicate this speech to their memory. I light this candle, Mr. President, to honor them, and may their memory be blessed. I'm sorry, but I refuse to spend this sacred day listening to lies and condemnation. This debate disgraces the fallen, and Israel will not take part in it. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, the Middle East is undergoing a deep transformation which is evolving in a very controversial way. More than ever before, we need to improve relations among states in the region, stabilize in the areas of conflict, and increase efforts to politically and diplomatically resolve them whilst basing themselves on the UN Charter principles. Our position on this is explained in the recently adopted by President Putin the concept of the foreign policy of Russia. Our priority is that on the Near East is to have a sustainable, comprehensive architecture for stability and cooperation, advancing interreligious and intercultural dialogue. We intend to develop an active interaction with all countries in the region, both bilaterally and also through our contacts with the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the League of Arab States, the Gulf Cooperation Council. We can see that there is a growing interest to the Russian initiative, which is aimed at ensuring collective security with the participation of all coastal states, both Arab states and Iran, also involving in this the outer circle of influential states. We welcome the positive changes which even recently seemed difficult to accomplish, and I'm referring to first and foremost the restored relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran with the mediation by the People's Republic of China, and the advanced plans to return Syria into the Arab family. This is something that we've been working for a long time, and something that was started with Russian cooperation, namely the normalization between Damascus and Ankara, using the benefits provided by the Astana format. To a large extent, thanks to the initiatives from Al Riyadh, we are seeing steps to help speed up the settlement of the conflict in Yemen. At the same time, we note that what remained outside of these positive changes is the Palestinian issue. When we initiated this meeting today, our goal was to raise the attention paid to the unprecedented growth of tension and violence in the area of Arab-Israeli conflict. We think now more than ever it is important to reiterate the common denominators for the Middle East settlement that we have in the Council and in General Assembly decision, stop the threat of yet another spiral of armed hostilities, and provide for a political horizon for a resumed peace process. The events in the West Bank, in the Gaza Strip, in East Jerusalem, and in the separation line between Israel, Lebanon, and Syria has increased the tension to a very dangerous level. Since the beginning of the year, as a result of military raids into Jenin, Jericho, Nablus, Huvar, clashes having to do with the violation of the status of the holy sites. As a result of that, more than 100 Palestinians perished, and there are thousands of wounded, and the number of Israeli victims is also growing, and this is something that the representative of that country has just talked about. The situation is also compounded by the Israeli strikes against Syria. This year, there already have been at least 10 such strikes, including the shelling of the Aleppo airport. This is the airport through which humanitarian assistance is being provided to those who are impacted by the destructive earthquake on the 6th of February. There is a growing number of incidents on the blue line with Lebanon, including the largest since 2006, an exchange of rocket strikes. The main reason for the regular outbursts of violence between the Palestinians and Israel remain the unilateral steps to create reversible facts on the ground and using force in order to protect such facts. We cannot go over in silence over the high pace of the building of settlements and outposts, land expropriation, demolition of houses, and random arrests. It is also not possible to close our eyes to growing radicalization of the Palestinian street and the growing rift between main Palestinian parties. This is fraught with a violent confrontation. Under these conditions, we, of course, think it's important to remove and prevent the symptoms of the worsening situation. But the absolute imperative for us here is to make sure that all leading players reaffirm that the two-state solution has no alternative, as it will meet the rights of Palestinians to have their own independent state with East Jerusalem as capital, and the right of Israelis to have a peaceful and safe coexistence with their neighbors and in the region as a whole. It is only through returning to direct negotiations on all final status issues it will be possible to break the cycle, the vicious cycle of violence and radicalization, and restore trust. But instead of trying to restore the political horizon, the United States and the European Union continue destructive attempts to replace real peace with some economic economic half measures and to advance Arab-Israeli normalization in circumvention of the fair resolution of the Palestinian issue and circumvention of the Arab Peace Initiative. The Middle East Quartet of International Mediators has fallen victim to that. Washington is now claiming the role of a single sponsor of the Middle East settlement process. It is not deterred by the fact that it has long ago lost the features necessary for an honest broker, namely neutrality and impartiality. All the more so since the decision made by the Trump administration, which run directly counter to Security Council resolutions and which the Biden administration did not go back on. The non-implementation of Security Council resolutions, not just on the Middle East issues, is something that needs to be especially mentioned, and because of the following. Fairly recently, the United States and allies made their utmost to make sure that every time there is a veto used in Security Council, the topic is brought into the General Assembly for discussion. We didn't object to that, even though we saw that this was targeted openly against Russia, but we have nothing to hide. When we use a veto, we very clearly explain why, and we can certainly very easily repeat such arguments in the General Assembly. But the thing here is this: a veto is an alienable right, part and parcel of the mechanisms we have enshrined in the UN Charter. There is no violation of the Charter when a veto is being used. On the other hand, not complying with the past Security Council resolutions is a violation of the Charter. I think Article 25, which requires that everyone implement Security Council resolutions. Perhaps it's time for those who buries past resolutions to report to the General Assembly, to explain themselves to the General Assembly. Among such resolutions, decisions on Palestine, on the Golan Heights, on Western Sahara, on the Kosovo settlement, on the Iran nuclear program, and of course on the Minsk agreements regarding Ukraine. And this is something that we talked about in detail yesterday. Americans and Europeans are using the Ukrainian topic so as to use blackmail threats and bring over countries to their side and distract their attention from the Middle East and other regions of the global south. So to say, we are going to be victorious over Russia any moment now, and then everything will resolve itself. This way, the crises who developing countries are trying to resolve are falling victim to double standards and the colonial instincts of the West, who are trying to dictate to the world entire what their requirements are, to ignore culture and the traditions of other peoples, and thus offending international law. I would like to quote here, with your permission, an excerpt from Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State's interview to CNN's Wolf Blitzer on the 8th of April 2022.
Answering a question about the Golan Heights, Secretary Blinken said, I quote, "Look, leaving aside the legalities of that question, as a practical matter, the Golan is very important to Israel's security. As long as Assad is in power in Syria, as long as Iran is present in Syria, militia groups backed by Iran, the Assad regime itself, all of these pose a significant security threat to Israel. And as a practical matter, the control of the Golan in that situation, I think, remains of real importance to Israel's security. Legal questions are something else."
I am not making value judgments here. I just simply quoted the statement made by Tony Blinken, who stated twice, leaving aside the legalities and legal questions are something else. So there you have an example of how resolutions are being implemented and how people position themselves within the UN. I think under these conditions, the role of the UN as a coordinator of multilateral diplomacy is particularly relevant, and we call the leadership of the Secretariat and the Secretary General himself to pay close attention to making sure that Security Council resolutions are implemented, especially those which have to do with the Middle East settlement, and to discharge his responsibilities. This is for the Secretary General, asking him to be more active as a moderator of the quartet without waiting for a permission to be given to him. Recently, the Secretary General decided to have an initiative to have a meeting on Afghanistan in the beginning of May. We support that. But why not have a similar initiative and also convene a meeting of the quartet? That's his prerogative. At the same time, of course, we call upon the Israelis and the Palestinians to stop all unilateral actions which can threaten the possibility of implementing the two-state solution. And this includes terror and other armed attacks, incitement to aggression, disproportionate use of force by any side, unlawful actions having to do with settlements, and, of course, any attempt to change the status quo of Jerusalem. The Palestinian movements is something that, for them, will wish to rise above their ambitions and come together on the basis of the PLO political platform. This will help them improve the socioeconomic situation, improve their institutions, and enter into dialogue with Israel on behalf of the entire Palestinian people. And we do know that in this direction, friends from Egypt, Jordan, and Algeria are also working. We're also undertaking efforts here in order to restore Palestinian unity, and we'll continue doing that. And I would like to here especially point out the role played by Saudi Arabia as the sponsor, the author of the Arab Peace Initiative, and Jordan as a custodian of the holy sites in Jerusalem, and the role of the League of Arab States, the Organization for Islamic Cooperation. And of course, we pay special attention to the need to do everything to make sure that the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East continues working effectively. Russia will continue contributing to the stabilization of the Middle East, doing its utmost for that in the Middle East and North Africa, to advance the Middle East settlement process together with other countries in the region and in coordination with other good faith mediators. As always, we are ready to discuss relevant initiatives as part of our collective work within the UN platform. Thank you. I now resume my function as President of the Council, and I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Khalifa Shaheen Al-Barar, Minister of State of the United Arab Emirates.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would like to thank His Excellency Sergei Lavrov for chairing this high-level debate. I also thank the Special Coordinator, Mr. Tor Vennesland, for his briefing and his continued efforts to de-escalate tensions. I would also like to wish a happy Eid al-Fitr to Muslims around the world. We are relieved that thousands of worshippers were able to perform the Eid prayer in Al-Aqsa Mosque in peace and calm, unlike the painful events that took place during the month of Ramadan, when the Israeli police forces attacked those praying in violation of the sanctity of places of worship and the freedom to practice religious rites. As we repeatedly affirmed on many occasions, we emphasize again today, the special status of the holy city of Jerusalem must not be compromised. The historic and legal status quo, as well as the Hashemite custodianship of the holy sites, must be respected both in word and in practice. We believe that Israel's decision to prevent settlers from storming Al-Aqsa Mosque during the last 10 days of Ramadan has prevented further confrontations. However, we regret the resurgence of unrest in the city of Jerusalem following yesterday's attack, which reflects the continued deterioration of the situation since the beginning of this year. We are deeply concerned regarding the continued violence and the increase in raids, demolitions, the displacement of Palestinians, which have further inflamed the situation. The number of Palestinians killed in the first 3 months of this year alone accounts for around half of the total deaths in the previous year. This is the deadliest death toll in nearly 2 decades. The heinous attack on the village of Hawara, the Palestinian village of Hawara, also raised alarm over the trajectory of current events. especially if Israel continues to embolden settlers, provide them with legal immunity, and exploit them as a tool to help confiscate more occupied Palestinian land while continuing their settlement activities. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that there are almost 700,000 settlers in 279 illegally built settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory, of which 147 are outposts, according to the United Nations. These numbers represent alarming facts on the ground and highlight the urgent need to protect the two-state solution. The solution represents the vision agreed upon by the international community and this Council to end the conflict. This is also the only solution in order to ensure that the two states of Palestine and Israel, including international humanitarian law. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, it is clear that this conflict is going through a very delicate and dangerous phase. This is evident as we witness the continued violations of the fragile truce in the Gaza Strip, as well as the recent expansion of violence through the exchange of missiles between southern Lebanon and Israel. These clashes and increased tensions reflect the regional dimensions of this conflict and the fragility of the security and stability of the situation. Therefore, it is no longer possible for the international community to deal with this conflict with the complacency we have witnessed in the past years. The current situation requires maintaining pressure to reduce escalation on all fronts, continuing calls for exercising maximum restraint and avoiding unilateral steps. We must not waste this opportunity to build on the momentum generated by the Aqaba and Sharm el-Sheikh meetings, where the two parties were able to reach mutual understanding following a break in serious talks since 2014. As such, we must ensure that the parties commit and implement these understandings and intensify efforts to restore confidence. This will pave the way towards resuming direct negotiations on final status issues. The main responsibility for ending violence lies with the parties that instigated it in the first place. As an international community and as a council responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security, we also have the responsibility to reject any violations of international law and Security Council resolutions. As confirmed in the recent presidential statement issued by this Council, this includes all acts of violence directed against civilians. We look forward to the international community continuing to express its categorical rejection of rhetoric that incites escalation. The current tensions cannot bear additional incitement of violence and hatred. What hangs in the balance is not only the fate of two peoples who deserve to live in peace and security, but also the fate of the security and stability of the entire region. In turn, the UAE will continue to support all regional and international efforts aimed at achieving these goals. We will continue our unwavering solidarity with the Palestinian people and their legitimate right to establish their independent Palestinian state based on the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. Finally, Mr. President, the ongoing challenges and crises in our region, including the latest developments in Sudan, make it imperative to focus on amplifying the voices calling for a peaceful settlement of the conflict and calling for dialogue. We must employ all available diplomatic means and open communication channels to resolve tensions and foster stability across the region. We hope that multilateral action will prove its ability to avoid the deadly conflicts looming on the horizon. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Al-Marar, for his statement. And I'll give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, I'd like to thank Mr. Venesland for his presentation of We are concerned by the current cycle of violence in the occupied Palestinian territories and in Israel. We condemn all violence against civilians, be it perpetrated by the Israeli settlers against Palestinian civilians or terror attacks targeting Israeli civilians. We call on Israel to protect the Palestinian civilians under its international obligations. This cycle of violence, which is fueled by despair in each side, will only end when Israeli settlement will end. France will never recognize illegal annexation of territory, nor will it recognize the legalization of spontaneous settlements. On the ground, we note that the annexation trend is growing despite the commitments undertaken by Israeli authorities in Aqaba and Sharm el-Sheikh in recent weeks. The partial abrogation by the Knesset of the 2005 disengagement law could lead to settlements in the north of the West Bank and to a legalization of outposts. And we called on the Israeli authorities to reverse this decision. Now, given that inaction is not possible, it can only lead to the conflict being regionalized, and we have seen this with an indiscriminate rocket fire against Israel from the Gaza Strip, South Lebanon and Syria, and France has firmly confirmed these attacks, and we reiterate our unflagging commitment to the security of Israel. Today is a memorial day in Israel. I note France also attaches great importance to the stability and sovereignty of Lebanon. This counts as a responsibility to defend the two-state solution and to ensure compliance with the resolutions that the Council passed. We recall our commitment to the treaty signed by Israel with its neighbors, and with respect to the historic status quo with the holy sites in Jerusalem and the specific role played by Jordan there. The violence in the beginning of the month in the mosque compound are worrying, as are growing pressure on the Christian communities in Jerusalem. We cannot continue averting our gaze and hoping that this situation does not worsen any further. We welcome the efforts made by the United States, Egypt, and Jordan. The parties undertook commitments, in particular in terms of stopping settlements, demolitions, and evictions, but also in the area of security. This has to be followed up. We call for the restoring of political horizon, which is the only thing which will help restore trust between parties who will allow for the implementation of the two-state solution. We are ready to contribute to these efforts together with our partners, in particular within the framework of the Amman Group, with our German, Egyptian, and Jordanian partners. The United Nations, particularly the special coordinator, have a special role to play here. Israelis and Palestinians alike deserve to live in peace and security. I thank you. Thank the representative of France for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Mr. President, first of all, I wish to thank the Special Coordinator for the Middle East process, Mr. Tor Wennesland. I thank him for his briefing this morning, and I reiterate our support for his work which is so valuable and necessary at this time. I also greet the delegations of Palestine and Israel. This is the 8th time that the Council is meeting to discuss the Palestinian question in this year so far. That is testament to the fact that this situation is one of growing tension and violence. The report that we've just heard confirms the above assertion. Ecuador is deeply concerned by the regrettable events which took place in the holy sites of Jerusalem in the first days of this month. We're also deeply concerned by the violence that followed them. We share the feelings of dismay and anguish expressed at that time by the Special Coordinator in response to the acts of violence which occurred within a place of worship. Attacking and striking pilgrims is unacceptable behavior. We also share his repudiation of the storage and use of fireworks in that very same place of worship. Holy sites must be respected by all as spaces of reflection and peace. Yet again, we have seen the grave consequences of failing to do just that. For this reason, we are compelled to reiterate our appeal to continue to exercise particular sensitivity and caution, and to respect the status quo of Jerusalem's holy sites, as well as to respect the role of the Kingdom of Jordan as their custodian. Moreover, we deplore the indiscriminate launching of rockets towards Israel's territory. We also deplore all acts of violence, terror, and provocation. We call upon parties to respect international law, international human rights law, international humanitarian law also, including the principles of distinction and proportionality. At the same time, we remind parties of their obligation to protect civilians. Mr. President, it is necessary to immediately break the cycle of violence. The regrettable events of the past must be investigated, and those responsible must be brought to justice. However, these events cannot act as a pretext for more acts of violence. Revenge is not justice. Revenge does not lead to peace. The first step to be taken to break this cycle of violence is to avoid words and deeds which incite and provoke. Leaders are those first and foremost responsible for demonstrating responsibility and self-control. This is necessary to avoid stoking tensions. It's very difficult to make progress towards a definitive solution if leaders with their words and deeds show themselves to have a myopic focus and show that all they seek to do is achieve popularity, even when doing so means rendering peace an ever more distant prospect. For this reason, in our view, the high-level meetings that took place in February in Aqaba, Jordan, and in March in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, with the participation of Israel, the Palestinian Authority, Jordan, Egypt, and the United States, are a positive development. We hope to see the meetings between the parties continue, and we hope to see the agreements reached be upheld. Candid dialogue is the only way to calm tensions. Finally, Mr. President, Ecuador reaffirms its solidarity with the Palestinian people. We reiterate our commitment to mitigating this difficult situation and bringing about relief. We're also committed to upholding the right of the people of Israel to live in peace. The above can only be achieved with a political solution which is lasting and just for all parties, and with the existence of two states, Palestine and Israel, existing side by side on the basis of 1967 borders and in accordance with the relevant resolutions of the Security Council. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Ghana.
Mr. President, let me begin by thanking Special Coordinator Tor Wensland for his briefing to the Council. Like many others, the unresolved aspiration of the Palestinian people for a safe and secure homeland remains a source of anguish for us, and the manifestation of the dispute in its security implications, humanitarian consequences, and human rights abatement is of deep concern. Ghana therefore hopes that this meeting would help to drive our collective ambition for urgent and pragmatic steps that can reassert the political horizon towards the two-state solution and the stability of the Middle East region. Mr. President, we have three main points to make. First, we are concerned by the policies and actions of the Israeli government that risk complicating the efforts to seek true dialogue, the realization of the two-state solution, which regrettably appears to recede with each passing day as a result of the facts on the ground. We believe that intentions to annex territory in the West Bank, legalization of illegal settler outposts, expansion of settler activities, as well as demolition of Palestinian-owned properties, transfer of forced evictions, and increased risk of settler harassment detracts from efforts for a political solution as it undermines the trust that is required for a genuine engagement between the two sides. Secondly, while welcoming the recent efforts that were made in the region by the governments of China, Egypt, Jordan, the UAE, and the US in helping to abate violence, encourage dialogue, and diffuse tensions between the Palestinians and the Israelis, we remain concerned by the continuing confrontations. Ghana encourages a strong commitment of the senior officials of Israel and Palestine to work together to avoid violence and de-escalate tensions on the ground, in line with the outcome of the Aqaba and Sharm el-Sheikh meetings. We also encourage the parties to remain committed to the cessation of hostilities and to take further steps to prioritize the prevention of violence and the pursuit of confidence-building measures to restore mutual trust and create a political horizon to address outstanding issues through direct dialogue. Thirdly, we condemn unequivocally attempts by extremists on both sides to carry out acts of provocation, which has lately resulted in confrontations, and are concerned by the interminable cycle of violence in the region, which negatively affects the economies, health, and socio-political lives of millions of people in the Middle East. We also condemn the spate of terrorist attacks against Israel. Lastly, we are concerned by the dire humanitarian situation of the Palestinian people. We are dismayed by the high levels of deprivation in Gaza and the occupied West Bank, as well as a result of the imposed siege, as well as the use of excessive force by Israeli security forces, with documented incidents of near-daily raids, arbitrary arrests of mostly Palestinian youths, and the violation of their basic human rights, as well as of international law and international humanitarian law. In responding to the dire humanitarian situation in the occupied Palestinian territories, particularly in Gaza, we call for continued support to ensure the easing of humanitarian access and free movement to and from Gaza. We thank donors that have contributed to UNRWA and encourage further financial and relevant support for the organization. We urge action to resolve the deepening economic and fiscal crisis faced by the Palestinian Authority, which is also at the root of the threat of unrest in the occupied Palestinian territories, especially in Area C of the West Bank and in East Jerusalem. We urge both Israel and Palestine to jointly establish a mechanism that will help improve the economic conditions of the Palestinian people and to significantly enhance the financial and fiscal situation of the Palestinian Authority in accordance with the previous engagements and in line with the outcome of the Aqaba and Sharm el-Sheikh meetings. Mr. President, the unending suffering of the Palestinian people, as well as the persisting security concerns of Israel, must compel us to be steadfast in the pursuit of the decades-long objective to resolve the Palestinian question. Ghana is of the firm belief that advancing the peace process will require regional and all international actors to reinvigorate the tools of diplomacy, including international mechanisms and processes, to shepherd a comprehensive settlement of the situation in the Middle East. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ghana for their statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Special Coordinator Wensland, for your informative briefing. As we heard earlier, Israel marks the somber holiday, Yom HaZikaron. We join our Israeli friends in commemorating the loss of those killed in past wars and terrorist attacks. And we unequivocally condemn terrorist attacks and all violence against civilians. This has already been a painful year for both Israelis and Palestinians, and we must all do everything in our power to reverse these worrying trends. Just this month, an already tense situation nearly boiled over into a broader regional conflict. Thankfully, we were able to avoid that. But these stakes underscore the imperative for all parties to exercise restraint in action and rhetoric to prevent further escalation of violence. We condemn this month's rocket attacks by Palestinian militants from Gaza and Lebanon, as well as attacks launched from Syria, which endangered civilians. Using Lebanon as a launch pad for rocket attacks against Israel only puts the Lebanese people at risk and increases the potential for further conflict. And the barrage of missiles out of Lebanon also endangered UNIFIL personnel who sought cover and protection from potential harm. The United States recognizes Israel's ability, like any other country, to exercise its inherent right of self-defense. We also are deeply upset by the incidents in the Al-Aqsa Mosque during the conversions of Ramadan and Passover. All sides must respect and maintain the historic status quo at Jerusalem's holy sites in word and in practice. We were pleased that the final week of Ramadan passed relatively peacefully, and I hope all those celebrating had a joyous Eid with their families and loved ones, just as I hope those celebrating Passover and Easter were able to enjoy the holidays. Colleagues, good faith dialogue remains without a doubt the best path to stability. It remains essential. The United States applauds efforts taken by the parties, along with the United States, Egypt, and Jordan, to de-escalate tensions and build further trust through direct talks in Aqaba and Sharm el-Sheikh. These meetings and the commitments the parties made were important first steps. Now we call on the parties to fully implement these commitments and look for opportunities for further confidence-building measures. The United States also remains concerned by the financial constraints the Palestinian people face. And we urge our partners to take further actions to meet needs on the ground. We welcome the inauguration of expanded operating hours at the Alabi Bridge border crossing, which will allow for easier travel by Palestinians and facilitate the transportation of goods. But as many of you know, UNRWA, a program that provides education, health care, and relief and social services to the Palestinian refugees, will likely run out of funding this summer. Over the past 2 years, the United States has helped improve the lives of millions of Palestinians through hundreds of millions of dollars in contributions to UNRWA. But we are also concerned by UNRWA's potential financial shortfall. If the international community does not step up, the consequences for regional stability will be grave. And if the international community does not step up, people will lose access to basic needs. And we can't not allow this to happen. All those who can give must give. Now is the time to make meaningful contributions to UNRWA and pursue further efforts toward the long-term stabilization of its finances. The United States believes Israel and Palestinians deserve equal measures of security, prosperity, and freedom, and we will continue to work toward these goals in tangible ways. We will continue to support a two-state solution and promote dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians. And we will continue to support all efforts to achieve a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Let us do everything possible to ensure that the days and the months and years ahead are brighter, more hopeful, and more peaceful for all. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Mr. President, I thank Special Coordinator Tor Wensland for his briefing. Since the beginning of this year, numerous incidents have happened that exacerbated tensions between Israel and Palestine. The Security Council has met urgently more than several times, including the most recent consultations held in response to the beatings and mass arrest of Palestinian worshippers by Israeli security forces at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which we condemned. But the situation remains volatile. Japan attaches great importance to preserving the historic status quo of the holy sites in Jerusalem. In this regard, Prime Minister Kishida stressed the importance of Jordan's special role of custodianship during this month's summit meeting with His Majesty King Abdullah II. Our Prime Minister also held a telephone talk with the President of the State of Israel, where he expressed his concern over unilateral measures by both sides. Any unilateral actions or provocations that aggravate an already tense situation are unacceptable. At the same time, Japan strongly condemns rocket attacks by Palestinian militants. We also condemn terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, including the terrorist attack in Tel Aviv on April the 7th. The settlement activities of Israel in the West Bank continue to be a cause for grave concern. It is imperative for the Israeli government to cease their settlement activities, demolitions, and evictions. The settlement activities, as well as the expansion of settlements, constitute a violation of international law and go against relevant Security Council resolutions. Japan once again urges all parties to exercise maximum restraint and refrain from actions that would escalate tensions and undermine efforts towards peace. And in this context, we welcome the serious efforts through the five-party talks, both in Aqaba and Sharm el-Sheikh, to manage the situation on the ground through engagement with the parties and advocacy for the resumption of direct negotiations. The international community should play an active role in supporting the parties to achieve a peaceful solution. And in this vein, Japan hosted the G7 Foreign Ministers meeting last week, in which the G7 called on Israelis and the Palestinians to take steps to build trust toward the realization of a two-state solution. They also expressed their readiness to continue assisting the Palestinians to enhance the economic self-reliance. I would also like to take this opportunity to reiterate Japan's enduring commitment to supporting Palestinians in need, including through UNRWA, for which Japan is one of the largest donors. In conclusion, peace and stability in the region cannot be achieved without a political resolution to this conflict. It is vital to end the cycle of violence on the ground and promote confidence-building measures to maintain the prospects for a two-state solution. Japan stands ready to contribute to these efforts, and we urge all parties to engage constructively towards a two-state solution. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you. I also thank Special Coordinator Wennesland for his briefing and for his office's constant efforts to maintain calm, particularly during this past month. Regrettably, over the past weeks, several escalations against the backdrop of religious festivities have again brought us too close to the brink of an uncontrollable and explosive scenario, threatening to trigger wider confrontations. These events should serve as a wake-up call. Malta remains extremely concerned at the unprecedented levels of violence, provocations, and unilateral actions which are jeopardizing any attempt at constructive remediation of the situation, which continue to directly impact the lives and security of thousands of people. The protection of civilians demands our undivided attention and focus. Malta unreservedly condemns all acts of terrorism and incitement to terrorism, which continue to threaten civilians and result in further tragic loss of life. Acts of terrorism can never be justified. We equally condemn indiscriminate rocket fire from Gaza and more recently from South Lebanon. In this respect, Malta reiterates Israel's legitimate right to self-defense. Nonetheless, we condemn Israel's excessive use of force and stress the need to respect the principles of necessity and proportionality, and in particular, the responsibility to protect women and children. We call on all parties to respect international law, including international humanitarian law. We also echo the presidential statement of 20th February, which opposes unilateral measures, including Israel's expansion of settlements, legalization of settlement outposts, and demolition of Palestinian homes. We are deeply concerned by worrying legal amendments and policies regarding settlements which continue to facilitate the fracturing of the occupied Palestinian territory, particularly in the West Bank. The recent repeal of the 2005 disengagement law, as well as the transfer of governance of Palestinian territory to civilian administration, are issues of deep concern, exacerbating conflict and obstructing peace. At the same time, we underscore the importance that the Palestinian Authority holds democratic elections. We remain encouraged by the signing of the Algiers Declaration of October 2022 and continue to urge the Palestinian factions to engage in good faith in the reconciliation process as a vital step towards a renewed Palestinian government which is representative of the Palestinian people. Along the same lines, Malta expresses concern at the political and fiscal situation of the Palestinian Authority. This is negatively impacting the livelihood of Palestinians. The disturbing events we witnessed during the past weeks at the holy sites and the cyclical violence that ensued should serve as an additional warning for actors to de-escalate and promote calm and constructive dialogue. These events come uncomfortably close to triggering a conflict with tragic ramifications. It is imperative that the international community aligns towards encouraging a return to a political horizon. Malta welcomes continued attempts to re-establish crucial dialogue, including the meetings which took place in Aqaba and Sharm el-Sheikh, while hoping that such efforts lead towards meaningful de-escalation. In closing, we reaffirm our commitment to a just and comprehensive resolution of the Middle East conflict based on a two-state solution along the pre-1967 borders, addressing the legitimate aspirations of both sides, with Jerusalem as the future capital of two states, living side by side in peace and security, in line with the relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions and internationally agreed parameters. We stand convinced that this remains the only viable path to peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you. And before starting, I recognise that today is Remembrance Day in Israel and express the hope that this conflict, which has cost so many lives on all sides, may be brought to a just and peaceful end. I thank Special Coordinator Wennesland for his briefing and also acknowledge the earlier presence with us of Foreign Minister Malki for joining us. Sadly, as we've heard, in recent weeks we have witnessed violence that is unacceptable. We call on all parties to desist from unilateral measures which undermine peace, stability, and the two-state solution. First, de-escalation remains imperative. We condemn indiscriminate rocket fire into Israel from terror factions in Gaza, Syria, and Lebanon. This year, 19 Israelis have been killed in acts of terrorism and 90 Palestinians killed by Israeli security forces. Among the former, 3 British Israeli nationals, members of the same family, victims of a terror attack in the West Bank on the 7th of April. We urge the Palestinian Authority to denounce incitement to violence. There is never justification for such acts. Among Palestinian fatalities, a 15-year-old boy was killed near Jericho on the 10th of April. While Israel has a legitimate right to self-defense, its security forces must exercise restraint in use of force and investigate all fatalities. Second, we urge all parties to cease unilateral actions which diminish prospects for peace. We condemn Israeli security forces' raids on Al-Aqsa Mosque during Ramadan, injuring many worshippers, and we call on all parties to respect the historic status quo and Hashemite custodianship. Third, we urgently need to redouble efforts towards a long-term peace. We applaud those laying foundations for dialogue, notably recent Jordanian, Egyptian, and US initiatives. It remains critical that both Israel and the Palestinians respect commitments made, including Israel's commitment to suspend settlement advancement. Settlements are illegal under international law and threaten the viability of a two-state solution. Our position is reflected in our enduring support for UN Security Council Resolution 2334. The UK remains committed to working with Israel, the Palestinian Authority, and international partners to bring an end to the terrorism that Israel faces and the destructive cycle of violence that continues. Peace will be sustainable only if both Israelis and Palestinians recommit themselves to a negotiated settlement leading to a secure Israel alongside a viable Palestinian state. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom. I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président, je tiens à...
Mr. President, I would like to thank the Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Mr. Tor Wennesland, for his presentation at this high-level debate. Switzerland is following the situation in the Middle East with utmost attention. The period of the major religious holidays was marked by acts of violence in the heart of the Haram el-Sharif Temple Mount in Jerusalem, followed by the launching of rockets into Israel from Gaza, from southern Lebanon, and from Syria. Switzerland has strongly condemned these acts of violence. The risk of escalation is real. It is crucial to ease tensions in and around the holy sites in Jerusalem. We call once again for a respect for the status quo on the Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount and for respect of Jordan's role as custodian. Concrete steps must also be taken to support the peaceful coexistence of all communities in Jerusalem. Regarding the Gaza Strip, despite the positive developments in the number of exit permits issued by Israel last year, especially for day laborers, the humanitarian situation remains worrying. 60% of Gazans depend on humanitarian aid. Most medical care is not available in Gaza, and we deplore the fact that more than 200 patients did not receive exit permits in February. Switzerland recalls that as an occupying power, Israel is obliged to ensure that the basic needs of the population of Gaza are met. While Israel is entitled to impose restrictions on the entry of certain goods, their consequences for the population must be proportionate to the legitimate objective of ensuring its security. Switzerland calls on the lifting of the closure, which has been imposed for almost 16 years. Switzerland also remains concerned by the high level of violence in the occupied Palestinian territory and in Israel. We urge the parties to protect the civilian population by respecting their respective obligations under international law and human rights law. In this regard, Switzerland notes that a total of 21 children died in violent circumstances in 2023. Here we call on all parties to continue the dialogue initiated last December with a special representative for children in armed conflict and to take measures to prevent and end grave violations against children. In this situation, which remains very volatile, Switzerland calls on the leaders of all parties to make every effort necessary to reduce tension and to refrain from any unilateral measure, any act of provocation, or any inflammatory language that could fuel the conflict. We call on the parties to implement the commitments undertaken in Aqaba and Sharm el-Sheikh in the wake of the Security Council's presidential statement of 20th of February. Switzerland is concerned by the continued planning of settlements in recent weeks, despite these commitments. It recalls that settlements are illegal under international humanitarian law and represent an obstacle to peace. It is urgent that the parties address the root causes of the conflict. The recent commitments should serve as a concrete basis for confidence building towards a negotiated two-state solution in accordance with international law and internationally agreed parameters, including Security Council resolutions. Switzerland stands ready to facilitate the resumption of credible dialogue for such a solution, including through its good offices. I thank you for your attention. I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Gabon.
Thank you, Mr. President. 1 year ago to this very day, this Council met in this same chamber during an open debate on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The distressing fact is that the picture before us today is almost exactly the same as it was, the same cycle of violence, the same rhetoric, the same impasse. I wish to thank Special Coordinator Tor Wennesland for his enlightening briefing and for his tireless efforts in the quest for peace between Israel and the Palestinian Authority. I welcome here among us the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Observer State of Palestine, and I also welcome the representative of Israel. Mr. President, the briefing given by the Special Coordinator today heralds, on this day of remembrance for Israel, heralds more concern than hope. The violence of recent weeks is the product of a particularly volatile context. Tension was ratcheted up a notch on the 4th of April during a raid conducted by Israeli forces inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This grave incident is one more of the myriad violations of the historic status quo of holy sites that we've seen since the beginning of this year. These violations have served to jeopardize, yet further still, the peaceful coexistence of peoples, particularly during this very sensitive period, which is the period of religious holidays for the three monotheistic religions, Islam, Judaism and Christianity. The status quo of holy sites must be respected and preserved. Here we recognize the crucial role played by the Kingdom of Jordan as official custodian of the Muslim holy sites of Jerusalem, and we reiterate our support for the work of the King of Morocco, the chair of the Al-Quds Committee of the OIC. His work is key in preserving the unique status of the Holy City as a symbol of the common heritage of humankind and of the three monotheistic religions, and as a place of dialogue and mutual respect. We echo the appeal launched by the Pope during Easter celebrations. He called for the resumption of dialogue in a climate of mutual trust and respect between Israelis and Palestinians, so that peace may reign in the Holy City and in the whole region. Mr. President, the recent conflagration on the ground with rockets being fired from Gaza, South Lebanon and Syria towards Israel, and the shelling by Israeli forces in the south of Lebanon and in the Gaza Strip and then in Syria was a reminder of the regional scope of this conflict. The uptick in hostilities noted in recent weeks has taken the form of acts of brutality and the disproportionate use of force against civilians. Such violence has claimed more and more victims. 2023 is on track to equal the macabre and tragic record set in 2022. With regards to the number of civilian victims produced, these victims include women and children among them. In this regard, the impact of the conflict on children is horrifying. They are killed or gravely wounded if they're not recruited or used. This is unacceptable. We urge both Israeli forces and armed Palestinian groups to uphold their obligations pursuant to international humanitarian law, namely the principles of distinction, proportionality, and precaution. My country reiterates its appeal to the political leaders of the two parties to refrain from, prevent, combat, and suppress hate speech and the rhetoric of intolerance. Rhetoric and speech which fuels belligerence and hampers peace efforts. Turning now to the sensitive issue of the return of human remains to Palestinian and Israeli families, we call upon parties to prioritize finding a solution to this issue which will foster a climate of trust, which itself will serve the cause of lasting peace. This issue is all the more sensitive given that it is linked to the respect of funeral rites, which are an integral part of the culture and identity of each of the parties. Mr. President, the security situation in the occupied Palestinian territory remains precarious and volatile, namely due to the continued application of illegal settlement expansion policies and due to the demolitions of Palestinian homes and due to the evictions of which many Palestinian families are victims. These are all factors which contribute to the destabilization of the aforementioned territories. These factors fan the flames of tensions in the West Bank and make both anger and the desire for revenge among victims all the more intractable. It is vital to give effect to Resolution 2334 adopted by this Council in 2016. That resolution called for the immediate and complete cessation of all settlement activity in the OPT, including East Jerusalem. In the same vein, the particularly concerning economic situation of the PA has been worsened and is worsened by the freezing of fiscal assets collected by Israel from the Palestinian authorities from the workers of the Palestinian authorities on the authorities' behalf, is particularly concerning and means that urgent measures must be taken to ensure economic recovery. The free access of Palestinian workers to Gaza and from Gaza and the West Bank to the Israeli labour market must be encouraged, as must the lifting of all restrictions in terms of materials accessing Gaza. Mr. President, Israel and the Palestinian Authority must work to bring about calm. It is patently clear that a complex situation with inextricably linked challenges cannot be resolved by unilateral actions being taken by single key figures. Rather, constructive and dialogue in good faith is necessary between the parties. Now more than ever before, the time has come to activate the channels of diplomacy in order to ensure that restraint and reason prevail. Activating such channels should also ensure the respect for the Palestinian people's right to self-determination and for Israel's right to security, with a view to resuming the peace process. We welcome the holding on the 19th of March in 2023 in Sharm el-Sheikh under the aegis of the Arab Republic of Egypt of a meeting of political and security officials from Jordan, Israel, Palestine, and America, pursuant to the agreement reached in Aqaba in Jordan in February. Gabon reiterates its commitment to the two-state solution. This solution cannot be obtained without a resolute political commit from all parties. It cannot be obtained without the mobilization of regional actors or without the staunch will of the international community to strive now more than ever before for the restoration of peace between Israelis and Palestinians in order to give a greater chance to the two-state solution, a two-state solution that we also ardently wish to see. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Gabon for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, we commend the Russian Federation decision to convene this important open debate focused on the question of the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. We consider this to be a matter of high priority on the agenda of the Council. We extend our deep appreciation to the Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Mr. Tor Wennesland, and for his insightful information shared in this meeting. We welcome the presence in this chamber of His Excellency Mr. Riyad Al-Malki, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and expatriates of the State of Palestine. Mr. President, as time goes by, the simmering conflict between Israel and Palestine seems to be boiling over, descending into a dangerous and permanent state of confrontation. We are deeply concerned over the increase of tensions between Israel and Palestine that leaves little prospect for a lasting peace and good neighborliness between the two peoples. The cost of this conflict has been high and dire. The most worrying factors are the high numbers of deaths, of injured persons, imprisonment, and land occupation, which unfold on a daily basis. We highly deplore this situation. It needs to be addressed as a matter of urgency by this Council and by the international community at large. The illegal occupation and the aggression are unacceptable and must cease. This Council has the primary responsibility to protect the most vulnerable people from this protracted conflict. In this regard, we deem it important that the Security Council resolutions on the matter be fully implemented in the interest of peace and stability in the Middle East. We believe and defend the long-standing two-state solution. In this connection, we attach great importance to the resumption of negotiations and the revitalization of the peace process between the parties. The political will and a strong sense of commitment by the two parties are the most crucial and needed element. The Palestinian people have rightly been claiming for the full recognition and implementation of their right to self-determination. We consider this to be fair, just, and legitimate under international law and the law of the United Nations, particularly so in the times when serious grievances have been amplified with the illegal colonial project that is dispossessing and displacing the Palestinian people from their lands. These acts constitute a gross violation of international law, of the Security Council and General Assembly resolutions and decisions. Mr. President, Mozambique expresses our deepest concern over the prevailing situation of violence in the holy places of Jerusalem. We deplore in particular the invasion and the desacralization of the holy sites. We call on Israel, the occupying power, to refrain from these acts. But more importantly, Mr. President, we need to bring Israel and Palestine back to the negotiating table as soon as possible. We must support them to recommit their political will towards a lasting and long-term solution. In this regard, we encourage all the initiatives, both regional and international, with the aim to finding a negotiated settlement of the conflict. Mr. President, we strongly appeal to the international community for an increased, predictable, and sustainable support for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees in the Near East and the World Food Programme. Mozambique reiterates its commitment in supporting the dialogue and constructive initiatives for a lasting peace and security in Israel and Palestine. Mr. President, we are aware that no two conflicts can be equated, but the experience of protracted and challenging problems we faced in the past in Southern Africa showed that the right side of history always prevails. They should serve as a token of inspiration to find a solution to the difficult and daunting problems in the Middle East, including the question of Palestine. I thank you.
Yeah.
I thank the representative of Mozambique. I give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brazil thanks the Russian presidency for organizing today's open debate on the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. I also thank Special Coordinator Wensland for his briefing. I welcome the participation in this meeting of Minister Al-Malki, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates of Palestine. Mr. President, since the beginning of this year, this Council has met several times to address the situation in Israel and Palestine as a series of crises have unfolded in an increasingly complex and volatile environment. Last month, ahead of Ramadan, Passover and Easter, we appealed for calm and maximum restraint, anticipating the possibility of a repetition of scenes of violence seen during the religious holidays of the previous year. Regrettably, appalling incidents such as raids inside Al-Aqsa Haram al-Sharif deeply disturbed the period of religious celebrations, injured worshippers, and damaged buildings. Once again, heightened tensions raised the possibility of escalation of violence into direct confrontation. The stability of the entire region was put at risk. Brazil, moreover, considers it of extremely concern the launching of rockets against Israeli civilians from the Gaza Strip and Lebanese territory. Access to religious sites is an essential component of freedom of religion or belief. Respecting the historic status quo of Jerusalem's holy sites is critical, as well as maintaining the custody of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Brazil condemns the actions undertaken in violation of historic status quo of the holy sites and regret that many worshippers ended up prevented from celebrating in peace and security. It should not be normalized, the fact that the religious holidays of such significance to Muslims, Jews, and Christians alike have become a period of permanent tension. Nor should we normalize the current overall situation characterized by ongoing violence and grave violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law. As the Special Coordinator often reiterates, and we agree, managing this conflict in perpetuity is not a viable solution. On the contrary, it moves us further away from the goal of lasting peace. If the core issues driving the conflict are not addressed, this intensified cycle of violence will continue. Mr. President, some elements are crucial here. Firstly, Israel must immediately cease all settlement activities in occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. As one of the main obstacles to peace, the continued expansion of settlements in flagrant violation of international law, including Resolution 2334, and it threatens the viability of the future Palestinian state and therefore the prospects for a two-state solution. Israel must also put an end to the demolitions and seizures of Palestinian structures, as well as to the displacement of Palestinian families. Secondly, all acts of violence against civilians must cease. Brazil condemns the settler-related violence, the disproportionate use of force by security forces, as well as the acts of terror, which are never justifiable. The Israeli authorities must provide adequate protection to the Palestinian civilian population as required by international law, as well as investigate and bring to justice the perpetrators of violence. Leaders on all sides must promote calm, avoid spreading inflammatory rhetoric, and speak out against actions aimed at inciting violence. Thirdly, and as important to peace as the aforementioned measures, is improving the living conditions of the Palestinian people, restoring their hope for a better future. Economic growth may also contribute to intra-Palestinian reconciliation, which is also a crucial step towards stabilization and resumption of a genuine dialogue. Palestinian refugees should also not be forgotten. We acknowledge the importance of increased, predictable, and sustainable support for UNRWA. For as long as it has existed, UNRWA has played a crucial role in providing relief and assistance to millions of people. The work of the agency is key to the maintenance of stability in the region. In conclusion, Brazil reaffirms its long-standing commitment to a two-state solution, with Palestine and Israel fully viable and living together in peace and security within mutually agreed and internationally recognized borders. We therefore encourage all parties to work in good faith and with renewed political will to leave this vicious cycle of violence behind. They should pursue the path of dialogue, working together in a constructive manner towards lasting, sustainable peace. And I thank you.
I thank Brazil. I now give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you. I thank the Special Coordinator for his briefing. We are deeply troubled by the fact that as we gather here every month, we note over and over again that the situation in the Middle East remains marred by pervasive, endless violence with the unfortunate consequences that we have witnessed so many times. It is dangerous, it is unsustainable, and it leads to a dead end. As Israelis gather to commemorate Memorial Day, we reiterate our strong and unreserved condemnation of terrorist attacks in Israel. 19 people have lost their lives this year in such attacks, including 4 children and European nationals. The deliberate targeting of innocent civilians with indiscriminate rockets from Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria, or other acts like the one that was perpetrated yesterday in Jerusalem when a vehicle hit pedestrians near a busy market, are unacceptable, unjustifiable, and should be condemned by everyone. There can be no justification ever for terror acts, and we support Israel's right to self-defense through proportionate response. A continued tense situation on the ground has, unfortunately, brought a troubling high number of civilians amongst the Palestinian people, 90 since the beginning of this year, that have lost their life, including innocent women and children. We deplore the indiscriminate violence by Israeli settlers against Palestinian civilians, including destruction of homes and properties. Unlawful actions should be investigated and perpetrators brought to account. We call for full implementation of the international humanitarian law and for the protection of civilians and their properties in all circumstances. We reiterate our position that unilateral actions drive the parties further apart and undermine trust between them, already in very short supply. In this respect, we recall our principled position that settlements are illegal under international law. They should stop as they constitute an obstacle to peace and hamper the prospects for the two-state solution. We call on both sides to exercise maximum restraint and spare no efforts in finding ways for easing the situation, bearing in mind that the proliferation of violence will do no good to anyone. Inflammatory rhetoric, incitement to violence and hate speech are unacceptable as they only breed violence, which will only continue to harm civilians. These warring developments reinforce the call for both parties, Israelis and Palestinians, to abide by and implement in good faith the commitments made in Aqaba and Sharm el-Sheikh. Every step towards confidence-building measures is an opportunity for them to open up the perspective of the currently blurred political horizon. Colleagues, the heightened tensions and violence in and around the holy sites are a cause for concern which reveal and underscore the complexities of the situation. The places of worship should be for safe, peaceful, and dignified religious rituals. Political and religious community leaders of all sides must reject incitement and provocations. We are nonetheless pleased to note that a record number of 1.5 million Muslim worshippers visit the Al-Aqsa Mosque throughout the holy month of Ramadan to exercise their rights. Peaceful coexistence between Muslims, Jews, and Christians, respect for religious diversity and tolerance towards different faiths and beliefs are fundamental values to be dearly preserved. They are at the heart of efforts to promote understanding and social cohesion and the best antidote against violence and conflict anywhere, even more so in the Middle East. This confirms the crucial importance of the preservation of the historic status quo of the holy places, and we praise the special role of the custodianship of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Let me express once more Albania's full support for the urgent need to restore a political horizon towards a just and negotiated two-state solution within the 1967 borders, unless otherwise agreed by the parties. We see no alternative to the comprehensive peace between Israelis and Palestinians. It means a safe and secure Israel and a viable, independent, and democratic Palestine. There has never been, and we do not believe there will ever be, an alternative to reconciliation through constructive dialogue and mutual understanding. A solution with two states for two people with mutual recognition and Jerusalem as a shared capital will ensure both sides, the Israelis and Palestinians, to live as neighbors in safety and security and enjoying freedom, dignity, and justice. And I thank you.
I thank Albania, and I'll give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'm honored to participate in this meeting as representative of Mr. Qin Gang, State Councilor and Foreign Minister of China. I would like to begin by thanking Foreign Minister Lavrov for presiding over this meeting. I also thank Special Coordinator Wennesland for his briefing. I also welcome the presence of Foreign Minister of the State of Palestine, His Excellency Al-Maliki. The series of problems he mentioned in his statement pointed to the essence of a persistently elusive settlement of the Palestinian issue. The international community should give good attention to this and earnestly reflect this. Mr. President, Muslims around the world have just celebrated Al-Fitr. I would like to take this opportunity to extend my cordial greetings to our many Muslim friends, brothers, and sisters who celebrate this holiday. Regrettably, however, the situation in the occupied Palestine territory has become nerve-wracking for the whole world during Ramadan over the past few years. Violence in the West Bank has intensified with frequent tensions in East Jerusalem and Gaza. The international community cannot become accustomed to this and cannot let it go unchecked. Instead, more must be invested in promoting a comprehensive, just, and lasting settlement of the Palestinian question with the greatest sense of urgency. First, we must oppose violence and incitement and seek common security. Over the past month, Israeli forces and police have many times raided the Al-Aqsa Mosque, beating and removing Muslims, shattering the peace and tranquility of Ramadan and triggering new tensions. China condemns all acts of violence against civilians and calls on all parties to exercise calm and restraint and put an end to all extremist and provocative statements and actions. Palestine and Israel are neighbors that cannot be moved away from each other. The security of one party cannot be based on the insecurity of the other. In order to fundamentally break the cycle of violence and establish lasting peace, equal attention must be given to the legitimate security concerns of both sides, whom must be encouraged to achieve common security through dialogue and negotiation. Second, we must stop unilateral actions to change the status quo and earnestly uphold the international rule of law. Settlement activity in the occupied territory is illegal. Since the beginning of the year, Israel has continued to pursue unilateral actions on approving returns, building new settlements, and legalizing settlements, encroaching on Palestinian land and resources, squeezing the living space of the Palestinian people, and making a territorially contiguous, independent, and sovereign state of Palestine even more elusive. We urge Israel to comply with the demands of UN Security Council Resolution 2334 and effectively cease all settlement activities. It also needs to be pointed out that unilateral measures to change the status quo of Jerusalem are null and void. China calls for earnest respect for the historic status quo at the holy sites of Jerusalem and for Jordan's custodianship over them. Third, people's livelihood must be guaranteed and Palestinian economic development must be promoted. The prolonged occupation and frequent instability have severely constrained the viability of the Palestinian economy and led to the worsening situation for Palestinians. Israel should seize and lift unreasonable restrictions on the movement of people and goods, as well as on land use in the occupied territory, create conditions for the development of Palestinian communities in the West Bank, and lift the blockade of Gaza Strip as soon as possible. The international community should also provide assistance to Palestine through multiple channels to help Palestine alleviate its financial crisis and ensure its provision of public services. China will continue to do what we can to provide humanitarian and development assistance to Palestine and increase its support for the work of UNRWA. Fourth, we must adhere to the two-state solution and promote the resumption of peace talks. Facts have repeatedly shown that piecemeal crisis management is hard to be sustainable, and it is even less of a substitute for a comprehensive and just solution. Saudi Arabia and Iran recently resumed diplomatic relations through dialogue, setting an example for diffusing differences through dialogue. On other Middle East issues, positive developments of dialogue and reconciliation are also in the making. It's never too late to do the right thing. State Councilor and Foreign Minister Qin Gang recently had separate phone calls with the Palestinian and Israeli foreign ministers, respectively. He conveyed that China encourages Israel and Palestine to show political courage and take steps towards resuming peace talks on the basis of the two-state solution. China is willing to facilitate such endeavors. We expect the international community to increase coordination, take substantive steps, and make unremitting efforts to promote the resumption of the Palestinian-Israeli talks and implement the two-state solutions. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China. I now give the floor to those delegations and member states who express their wish to speak at the open debate to date. And the first one I give the floor to, with pleasure, is to our former colleague and now First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan, Karat Umarov. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Glad to be back here. We commend the Russian presidency for hosting this debate on Middle East. We also recognize today the important contribution of Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, Mr. Wennesland, and thank him for his tireless efforts. We echo the warnings of the international community that the current cycle of conflicts in the Middle East, especially the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, is a cause for serious concern. The conflict has the potential to further escalation, leading to destabilization of the entire region and beyond. It requires our urgent and immediate attention. Kazakhstan joins the common concern on continued settlements expansion across the occupied Palestinian territory. Kazakhstan calls on all interested parties to refrain from any actions that could undermine the advancement of the two-state solution. We appeal to all political community and religious leaders to spare no efforts to end the intensifying hostilities. In view of the above, Kazakhstan suggests the return to the dialogue between all sides of conflict, accompanied by new measures for building trust and improving the humanitarian situation in Gaza. This is essential because Gaza remains an integral part of the two-state solution in keeping with relevant UN resolutions. Taking into account that both Israel and Palestine are members of the Conference on Interaction and Confidence-Building Measures in Asia, we call on them to use multilateral cooperation mechanisms of this organization to bring closer the positions of these countries. Kazakhstan reiterates the most urgent need of supporting UNRWA in its critical role in mitigating the deteriorating situation in Gaza and promoting long-term development of the area. The current situation, as we witness today, is deepening poverty, unemployment, and chronic economic regression, which will fuel further the conflict. The deterioration of the security and social economic situations across the occupied Palestinian territory must be reversed. Kazakhstan's long-standing policy is to create an independent state of Palestine, coexisting peacefully with Israel within the 1967 borders. We join others in reinforcing the two-state solution as the only viable solution for a durable peace. Kazakhstan stands ready to join every mediation effort, especially to ensure both Israel and Palestine to live in peace, security, progress and prosperity that are the long-cherished goals of both nations. I thank you.
I thank Kazakhstan. And I now give floor to His Excellency, Mr. Gerardo Penalver Portal, First Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Cuba.
Mr. President, we align ourselves with the statements delivered by Azerbaijan on behalf of the non-aligned movement and by Senegal on the exercise of the inalienable rights of the Palestinian people. We welcome the trilateral agreement reached jointly by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the People's Republic of China. Pursuant to that agreement, Saudi Arabia and Iran restored diplomatic relations and reopened embassies. We hope that this step will contribute to regional stability and security. Examining the situation in the Middle East as it has played out over the last quarter, this positive event stands in stark contrast with deplorable events. During the month of Ramadan, the climate of violence was exacerbated by Israel's incursion into the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Israeli attacks against the faithful. These acts violated flagrantly international norms and wounded the religious sentiments of the Palestinian people. In a context in which violence, detention, imprisonment, the violation of human rights, and the killing of Palestinian civilians are daily occurrences in the occupied territories, the Palestinian people continue to suffer the Israeli practices of apartheid on their own territory. We reject the Israeli military aggression against an occupation of Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. We also condemn Israel's annexation policy and its illegal colonizing practices. These include the persistent destruction of housing and property, the forced displacement of Palestinian families, and the construction and expansion of Israeli settlements. We condemn the persistent blockade of the Gaza Strip and the latent plans to annex the Palestinian territories in the Valley of Jordan and other parts of the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Contrary to the narrative that some attempt to impose as part of their efforts to rewrite history, the United States is responsible for repeatedly obstructing the Security Council's action to bring about a broad, just, and lasting solution, as must selectivity, inconsistency, and political manipulation. All of these practices imperil the cause of international peace and security to the detriment of the Security Council's mandate. We reiterate our appeal for the total and unconditional withdrawal of Israel from the Syrian Golan and from all occupied Arab territories. We call for the cessation of external interference in Syria and for the full respect of its sovereignty and territorial integrity. At the same time, we support the quest for a peaceful and negotiated solution to the situation imposed upon this sister Arab nation. We reaffirm our support for the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action with Iran and our support for the inalienable right of states to the peaceful use of nuclear energy. We reiterate our repudiation of the U.S.'s unilateral withdrawal from the agreement. We call for the immediate and unconditional lifting of the arbitrary and illegal unilateral coercive measures imposed by the United States against nations in the Middle East. We will continue to decisively support the State of Palestine's entry as a full member of the United Nations. We support the appeal issued by its president for the convening of an international peace conference. It is urgent to heed the appeals made throughout history by the UN, the Non-Aligned Movement, the League of Arab States, and the OIC, as well as other key actors. Appeals, that is, for the defense of the just cause of the Palestinian people. We hope that this Security Council would discharge its mandate. Thank you.
I thank Cuba for their statement. I would like to remind all speakers to limit their statements, if possible, to no more than 4 minutes in order to enable the Council to carry out its work expeditiously. I now give the floor to the representative of Jordan.
Mr. President, allow me to congratulate the Russian Federation on assuming the presidency of the Security Council. I wish you all success in leading the Council's deliberations this month. I welcome Mr. Sergei Lavrov, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, and His Excellency Dr. Riyad al-Maliki, Foreign Minister of Palestine. And I thank the Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Mr. Tor Wennesland, for his valuable briefing. Mr. President, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan stresses that it is important to make concerted regional and international efforts to stop the deterioration we're seeing in the occupied Palestinian territories and to ensure de-escalation by putting an end to all measures that stand in the way of de-escalation, to relaunch serious negotiations to achieve comprehensive, just and lasting peace on the basis of the two-states solution. Achieving this peace according to Council resolutions to establish an independent sovereign Palestinian state along the lines of the 4th of July 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital, living side by side in peace and security with Israel, is the basis for peace and security in the region. Protecting the right of all peoples of the region to peace, security, and stability requires putting an end to all unilateral Israeli measures that undermine the two-state solution, most notably the settlement activities, confiscation of land, and evicting Palestinians from their homes. Mr. President, it is also important to respect the legal and historic status quo of the Muslim and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem. All practices that undermine the status quo must stop. As Jordan is the custodian of the Muslim and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem, the Kingdom of Jordan will continue to play its full role to protect the Muslim and Christian holy sites and their Arab, Muslim, and Christian identity. We will continue to respect the legal and historic status of these holy sites. In this context, we stress once again that Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Haram Al-Sharif, with its area of 144,000 square meters, is a place of worship exclusively for Muslims. The Jerusalem Awqaf and Aqsa Mosque Administration of Jordan is the sole authority that has the prerogative of managing the affairs of Al-Haram Al-Sharif and regulating the entry into Al-Haram Al-Sharif. Mr. President, Jordan will also continue to cooperate with all partners to stop the deterioration, to stop violence and the drivers of violence, to restore a political horizon to achieve a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace based on a two-state solution. This peace is a strategic choice, a Jordanian, Palestinian, Arab strategic choice, a necessity at the regional and international level. Working towards such peace is a joint responsibility. Jordan stresses the importance of implementing all outcomes of the Al-Aqaba and Sharm el-Sheikh meetings. These meetings led to a number of commitments, most notably respecting the signed agreements and stopping all unilateral measures, stopping violence, and respecting the historic status in the city of Jerusalem. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Jordan for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Egypt.
السيد الرئيس معالي سيرجي.
Mr. President, Mr. Sergei Lavrov, Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation, I would like to congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Council this month. We highly value the holding of this meeting at ministerial level, which is consistent with the long-standing position of Russia in support of Palestinian rights. I would also like to welcome His Excellency Khalifa Shaheen Al-Marar, Ministry of State at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of the Probably UAE, and we welcome also His Excellency Foreign Minister Riyad Al-Maliki, Foreign Minister of Palestine. I would like to thank Mr. Tor Wennesland for his briefing. Egypt allied itself with the statements by the Arab Group, the OIC, and the NAM. Mr. President, tensions have intensified over the past few weeks as a result of continued Israeli violations in the West Bank, including the occupied East Jerusalem. As a result of settlement expansion, the confiscation of land, the demolition of Palestinian structures, the storming of Palestinian cities, and continued killings by occupation forces and settlers of unarmed civilians, including children. Since the beginning of the year, the number of Palestinian martyrs has amounted to 98. These are practices that the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs have been condemning in several statements recently. As the situation remains tense, Mr. President, Egypt, in cooperation and coordination with the United States of America and the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, sought to hold the two meetings in Sharm el-Sheikh and Al-Aqaba in February and March with the participation of Palestine and Israel to contain the situation and to work on de-escalation to ensure self-restraint to stop the bloodshed. During these meetings, a set of recommendations have been agreed on, most notably stopping unilateral measures, especially when it comes to settlements, and the respect of the status quo and the custodianship of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Despite the agreements reached in Al-Aqaba and Sharm el-Sheikh, calm on the ground has not been restored as the agreements have not been implemented. Over the past few weeks, the holy sites in the occupied city of Jerusalem have continued to be subjected to Israeli violations at a time where religious holidays of the three Abrahamic religions overlapped. Radical Jewish groups have stormed Al-Haram al-Sharif, protected by occupation forces. Occupation forces have attacked worshippers and have imposed restrictions on the freedom of movement on Muslims and Christians, restrictions that prevented them from accessing places of worship in flagrant violation of international law, UN resolutions, and the Jordanian custodianship. Mr. President, the current situation confirms what Egypt has repeatedly raised the alarm about, that the continued violations portends a vicious circle of violence, and innocent civilians will pay the price. To avoid a persistence of the current situation and to maintain the prospects of the two-state solution and peace, Egypt calls for taking the three following steps. First, the implementation of what has been agreed upon in both meetings in Al-Aqaba and Sharm el-Sheikh, especially when it comes to stopping any unilateral measures related to settlement expansion, stopping violence against civilians, whether by settlers or Israeli occupation forces, stopping the confiscation and demolition of Palestinian structures, stopping arrests and the storming of Palestinian cities. Second, respecting the historic and legal status quo of Islamic and Christian holy sites in East Jerusalem, and also respecting the custodianship of Jordan over the holy sites. Third, providing the necessary international protection to the Palestinian people and ensuring accountability for the different violations. Mr. President, implementing the aforementioned steps will undoubtedly contribute to de-escalation in the short term, will contribute to breaking the cycle of violence, especially if it is coupled with lifting the blockade on the Gaza Strip and providing support to UNRWA. In the medium term, there's an urgent need to address the root causes of the conflict. It's not enough to manage the conflict. We must reinvigorate the peace negotiations between both sides by reviving the role of the quartet, resuming its meetings as soon as possible according to the agreed upon international terms of reference. In conclusion, Egypt stresses its support to the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people, notably its right to self-determination and establish a Palestinian state along the lines of the 4th of June 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital according to the agreed upon terms of reference, the international law and the Arab Peace Initiative. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Egypt for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Lebanon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I deliver the statement on behalf of the Arab group, I would like to seek your indulgence as I might exceed the 3 minutes because this is a group statement. Thank you so much.
Mr. President, allow me to congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Council this month. We express our appreciation for the Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process. We thank him for his briefing. I deliver the statement on behalf of the Arab Group in New York. Mr. President, last month, Council members have repeatedly called for de-escalation in the occupied Palestinian territories in general and in Jerusalem in particular, at a time where the religious holidays of the three Abrahamic religions coincide. Nevertheless, the occupying power have ignored these calls and practiced violence against Palestinians, Muslims and Christians. The occupying power have also limited the ability of Palestinians to exercise their religious rights, especially in the Nativity Church and Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Arab Group strongly condemns violence by the Israeli occupying forces against worshippers this month. This is a continuation of the cycle of violence that has been systematic against Palestinians since the beginning of this year. We condemn the storming of Al-Aqsa Mosque. We condemn attacking worshippers and arresting hundreds of them. These irresponsible acts in holy sites provoke millions of Muslims around the world, especially during the holy month of Ramadan. The Arab group stresses the importance of respecting the legal and historic status quo in Al-Haram al-Sharif by Israel, the occupying power. That includes respecting the status of Al-Haram al-Sharif with its area of 144 dunams as a place of worship exclusively for Muslims. It is also important to respect the role of the Jerusalem Awqaf and Aqsa Mosque Administration of Jordan as the sole authority which has the prerogative of managing the affairs of Al-Haram al-Sharif and regulating entry into Al-Haram al-Sharif. We stress the right of the State of Palestine to exercise its sovereignty over the city, over occupied East Jerusalem, the capital of Palestine and the holy sites in East Jerusalem. Israel has no sovereignty over the holy sites in East Jerusalem. Mr. President, the Arab group values the positions by state that condemned and rejected the storming by Israel of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which was a hostile and a provocative act. We reject altering the historic and legal status. The group expresses its support of all efforts to protect the occupied city of Jerusalem and to defend the holy sites and to reject any altering to its demographic character and Arab identity. We condemn the extremist views and positions of the new Israeli government in flagrant violation of international law and Security Council resolutions. This led to a state of congestion and tension in the occupied Palestinian territories. Israel is targeting Palestinian civilians. Israel is killing their children, young people, women, the elderly in their villages, their streets, their cities. Israel is storming their homes, their schools, their places of work. They're deliberately attacking health teams and journalists. Israel continues to expand settlements. The new Israeli government is inciting to violence and is completely ignoring all legal and humanitarian norms in defiance of the position of the international community. Against this background, the Arab group calls upon the Security Council to bear its responsibilities to ensure the implementation of its resolutions and to stop all illegal, provocative, escalatory and unilateral steps, to stop violations by Israel, violations that continue unabated to expand illegal settlements. Israel continues to kill innocent people. It continues to confiscate Palestinian land and structure. It continues to displace the original residents, including in the city of Jerusalem. That has been accompanied by a flagrant violation of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and Al-Haram al-Sharif by occupation forces and radical settlement groups. In light of this aggression, the Arab group requests international protection, urgent international protection for the Palestinian people, in line with the suggestions and proposal by the Secretary General that the General Assembly has welcomed. In light of the increasing Israeli aggression, the Arab group condemns arbitrary detention by Israel, condemns the deprivation of treatment for prisoners. We express our support to the struggle of the prisoners to get released. It is important to ensure the implementation of humanitarian international law and international law, human rights law. Pressure must be exercised on Israel to release all detainees, to release the bodies of the martyrs. Israel must stop its policy of house arrests and other unacceptable policies. We call upon the international community and members of the Security Council to condemn all forms of violence practiced by the occupation forces and radical settler groups targeting Palestinian civilians. We call for accountability for all these practices that target Palestinian civilians. Mr. President, comprehensive, just, and lasting peace is not going to be achieved until the Palestinian people is granted its inalienable legitimate rights, including the right to self-determination, ending the illegal Israeli occupation, ensuring the independence of a sovereign state of Palestine along the lines of 1967 with East Jerusalem as its capital. This is why we call upon the countries of the world to express solidarity with the struggle of the Palestinian people. We call upon the countries of the world to recognize the State of Israel and its right to become a fully fledged member of the United Nations. We welcome GA Resolution 247/77. It calls for requesting an advisory opinion of the ICJ related to the presence of Israeli occupation on Palestinian land and the repercussions of that occupation, as it is in violation of international law and the UN Charter. We call upon all member states that uphold the values of justice and uphold international law to support the State of Israel in this endeavor by providing written submissions to the ICJ until the 25th of July 2023 and to provide other oral statements to the ICJ. We call upon the ICC to complete the criminal investigation and to hold the perpetrators of war crimes and crimes against humanity accountable. The Arab group values the Jordanian role in protecting the Muslim and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem as part of the custodianship of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan under the leadership of His Majesty King Abdullah II Ibn al-Hussein. We also value the role of His Majesty King Mohammed VI, the King of Morocco, as chair of Al-Quds Committee. We express our appreciation to Algeria under the leadership of President Abdelmajid Tebboune, the efforts made to support the Palestinian question through the historic positions of Algeria and the financial aid provided to the budget of the State of Palestine. We would also like to express our appreciation to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia under the leadership of King Salman bin Abdulaziz for providing support to the holy sites in Jerusalem. We also express our appreciation to the Arab Republic of Egypt under the leadership of His Excellency President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi for the historic role played by Egypt in support of the Palestinian question. We express our appreciation to all Arab efforts aiming at maintaining the city of Jerusalem as a capital of the state of Palestine and maintaining its Arab, Islamic, and Christian identity. We express our appreciation and gratitude to countries hosting Palestinian refugees, including Lebanon. In conclusion, Mr. President, the Arab group stresses that the Palestinian cause is the central Arab question. It has been on the agenda of the Council since 1948. This shows the injustice that has been inflicted upon the Palestinian people. The 15th of May 2023 marks the 75th anniversary of Al-Nakba and its repercussions that have been affecting generation after generation. This also shows that the international community has been unable to enforce resolutions of this Council and of the United Nations. We are far away from turning our hopes into reality. There are multiple peace initiatives. There are multiple UN resolutions. However, the situation on the ground continues to deteriorate for Palestinians, including for refugees. The unjust reality of the occupation has not changed. The hostile campaigns by Israel have not changed and continue unabated. Israel continues to disregard international law and international humanitarian law. The international community is also ignoring international law. In this context, it's important to provide political and financial support to UNRWA until the Palestinian question is settled, according to the Resolution 194 on the right of return. Achieving peace in the whole Middle East will only be guaranteed through the implementation of relevant UN resolution, the latest of which is Resolution 2334. We also need to implement the Arab Peace Initiative and ensure the establishment of an independent Palestinian state along the lines of the 4th of June 1967, with East Jerusalem as its capital. I ask you, Mr. President, to allow me to make a very brief statement in my national capacity, speaking on behalf of the government of Lebanon. Lebanon condemns attacks by Israel on Friday, the 7th of April, 2023, targeting parts of southern Lebanon. This threatened the lives of Lebanese people and threatened Palestinian territory. We believe this is an act of aggression in flagrant violation of Lebanese sovereignty. It is a threat of the stability that has been prevailing in southern Lebanon. This is a flagrant violation of Security Council Resolution 1701, and it's a threat to international peace and security. Lebanon rejects the use of its territories as a launching pad to destabilize the situation. We have the right of self-defense. We stress that keeping communication channels open with UN and UNIFIL is the only way to resolve any issues to maintain calm and stability. Lebanon warns that violations on the blue line result from violations by Israel. Israel has established a wall, a T-shaped wall on Lebanese territories, and the Security Council must condemn these violations. On the occasion of the 45th anniversary of the establishment of UNIFIL, Lebanon expresses its gratitude to UNIFIL and its role in Lebanon. We are grateful to troop contributing countries to UNIFIL, the presence of UNIFIL and its role to ensure de-escalation is important to maintain stability and to avoid miscalculation and escalation along the blue line. It is important to monitor the observance of Resolution 1709. Lebanon stresses the importance of coordination between the Lebanese government and UNIFIL forces in accordance with the Resolution 1701. I stop there, Mr. President, and thank you.
Спасибо.
Thank you. I thank the representative of Lebanon for their statement. Once again, I would like to recall the appeal made by the presidency to limit your statements to 4 minutes to enable the council to conclude its work expeditiously while we respectfully listen to all of those who want to contribute to today's discussions. I now would like to give the floor to the Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank His Excellency Sergei Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, for convening today's Security Council open debate on the Middle East, including the question of Palestine. I would also like to thank Mr. Tor Wensland, UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, for his briefing. We follow with serious concern the recent developments surrounding Israel and Palestine, including the growing tensions on the ground. We join the international community in urging all the parties concerned to exercise maximum restraint and refrain from violence and provocative actions in order to avoid further escalation of the situation and end this vicious circle of violence. We support all efforts to prevent all forms of violence, terrorism, and violent extremism. The Philippines recognizes the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a key to the region's peace and stability. The conflict can never be resolved by violence, but through meaningful dialogues and negotiations in accordance with international law. We continue to support the peaceful implementation of all UN initiatives towards the resolution of the Middle East conflict. We support all efforts to revive the Middle East peace process articulated in the Quartet's roadmap to peace, including affirmative steps to be taken immediately to reverse negative trends on the ground that are imperiling the two-state solution in accordance with Resolution 2334 of 2016. The Philippines has always expressed support for the creation of the State of Palestine, living in peace and security with its neighbors. In this regard, the Philippines reaffirms its support for a two-state solution. We commend the efforts of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, under extraordinary circumstances, to immediately respond to the humanitarian needs of affected populations, both refugees and non-refugees, including the tens of thousands of people who have sought safety in agency schools in Gaza, including designated emergency shelters, which are equipped to host internally displaced persons during times of conflict. We should continue to support UNRWA's work to protect the delivery of vital services to millions of Palestinian refugees. The Philippines enjoins the parties to bring a more intense focus on building trust and confidence. We also ask them to refrain from actions that could further incite violence. We encourage the parties to clearly demonstrate their resolve to pursue a just and lasting peace upon which the world, and not only their peoples, would undoubtedly benefit. We call on all stakeholders, including the Middle East Quartet, to help negotiate the best possible diplomatic outcome. As the Secretary General emphasized, it is critical to de-escalate the situation and move towards re-establishing a political horizon. The statements from the European member states, the PRST, statements made by the President of the Security Council, and the joint communique communique from Aqaba are welcome calls for calm. If implemented, the steps outlined in Aqaba could be an important start to reversing negative trends on the ground. We also welcome the recent establishment of diplomatic relations between Israel and a number of Arab countries with a view to enhancing the prospects to reach a comprehensive settlement in the Middle East peace process. Finally, the Philippines reiterates the importance of supporting steps that would expand the space for meaningful dialogues and negotiations, building trust and mutual understanding and cooperation for peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Philippines for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Turkey.
Mr. President, I would first like to congratulate you on your assumption of the presidency of the UN Security Council. I thank you for convening this open debate and also thank Special Coordinator Venezuelan for his briefing. As we meet to discuss the situation in the Middle East, the conflict between Israel and Palestine is going through one of its most difficult episodes in history.